The sensational trial of Lizzie Borden. On August 4th, 1892, a grisly double murder shocked the residents of Fall River, Massachusetts. A successful businessman named Andrew Borden and his wife Abby had been murdered that very morning in their own home. Both hacked almost beyond recognition by an unknown assailant. Andrew's body was found by his youngest daughter, Lizzy, at just before 11:10 a.m. She ran to the staircase and called for the maid, saying, "Maggie, come quick, father's dead. Somebody came in and killed him." The following investigation resulted in 2 charges of murder in the first degree being laid against Andrew's own daughter, Lizzie Borden. Both the murders and the subsequent trial made headlines in sold newspapers across the nation. The sensational trial of Lizzie Borden soon became a part of American folklore, even inspiring a nursery rhyme that is still repeated to this very day. Lizzie Borden took an axe, gave her mother 40 whacks. When she saw what she had done, she gave her father 41. Andrew Borden grew up in a modest surrounding and struggled to make ends meet as a young man. Despite being related to several wealthy and influential residents, he eventually found success in the manufacturing and sale of furniture and caskets, and then branched out to become a very successful property developer. He was also a director of several textile mills and owned several commercial properties. In addition to all of these lucrative positions and business ventures, Andrew was the president of the Union Savings Bank and a director of the Durfee Safe Deposit and Trust Company. At the time of his death, Andrew Borden's estate was valued at $300,000, which would have been equivalent to roughly $9 million in 2020. At age 23, Andrew married his first wife, Sarah, in a ceremony that took place on December 25, 1845. The newlywed couple moved into a house on 92 2nd Street in Fall River, Massachusetts. Sarah gave birth to their eldest daughter, Emma Borden, in 1851. And Lizzie came along in July of 1860. Sarah died in June of 1863, a little more than a month before Lizzie's 3rd birthday. Andrew didn't remain a widower for very long. He soon made the acquaintance of 37-year-old Abby Gray, and the two exchanged vows on June 6, 1865. Lizzie and Emma were raised in a decidedly Christian atmosphere. They both regularly attended services at Central Congregational Church in Fall River. Lizzie was heavily involved in the church activities as a young woman, often volunteering her time to teach Sunday school to children of recent immigrants to the United States. She was also the secretary-treasurer for the Christian Endeavor Society, a member of the Women's Christian Temperance Union, and she was active in the Ladies' Fruit and Flower Mission. It's unclear how long Lizzie had felt about her new stepmother as a young child, but she had stopped referring to Abby as mother sometime in 1887, preferring to address her by her given name instead. Some within the family's immediate circle contended that Lizzie had a cordial relationship with her father and stepmother, but the Borden's maid testified that the two sisters rarely took their meals at the family table. According to Hannah Gifford, a cloak maker in Fall River, Lizzie had once told her that Abby was a mean old thing. Gifford claimed Lizzie had also said, "I don't have much to do with her. I stay in my room most of the time." As far as Lizzie was concerned, her stepmother had married her father for his money, and she did not consider Abby to be her real mother. She was quick to point out this fact while being questioned at the scene of the crime by Deputy Marshal John Fleet. When Fleet referred to the deceased as her mother, Lizzie said, "She was not my mother, sir. She was my stepmother. My mother died when I was a child." Despite his financial success, Andrew was frugal with his fortune. Although he could have easily afforded to move his family to a much larger home in the Hill, a much more affluent neighborhood, the Bordens still dwelled in the same house he purchased in the 1840s. Andrew had even refused to install indoor plumbing, even though it was common for well-to-do families to have running water inside their homes. The patriarch of the Borden family was also known to have made several enemies with his business dealings. In fact, the investigation initially centered on speculation around the identity of a laborer who allegedly visited the Borden home earlier that morning and asked for the wages due to him, only to be told by Andrew Borden that he had no money and to call later. This lead was soon abandoned as evidence quickly mounted against Andrew's youngest daughter. The investigators discovered that on June 4th of the previous year, there had been a daytime robbery of cash and jewelry at the Borden home. Emma and Lizzie were home at the time. Also present during the theft was the maid, a 25-year-old Irish immigrant named Bridget Sullivan, who the Bordens referred to as Maggie because they couldn't be bothered to remember her name. Lizzie had already been accused of shoplifting by a local merchant, so she immediately became the family's prime suspect. From this date onwards, doors in the Bordens' home, inside and out, were always kept locked. In May of 1892, Andrew killed several roosting pigeons in the loft of his barn, believing they were an attractive nuisance to the local children. Lizzie was upset because she had been taking care of the birds as a hobby. The most significant detail of this event was that the method Andrew had chosen to dispatch of Lizzie's beloved pigeons. He killed them with a hatchet. In the months leading up to the murders, Andrew had begun to hand over real estate to various members of Abby's family. This did not sit well with the Borden sisters. After their stepmother's sister received a house, the sisters demanded to be given a rental property. Andrew caved to their demands, and they purchased the rental property for a nominal sum of $1. A few weeks before the murders, they sold the property back to their father for $5,000, the equivalent of $144,000 today. A particularly nasty argument in July of 1892 ended with both sisters taking extended vacations, quote-unquote, in New Bedford. They returned to Fall River a week before the murders, but Lizzie chose to stay in a rooming house for an additional 4 days before coming back to the family home. A few days later, on the morning of August 2nd, Abby and Andrew Borden both complained of having an upset stomach. Abby visited her doctor and told him she believed she may have been poisoned, as her husband had made many enemies over the years with his unsavory business practices. The doctor was skeptical and sent her home without treatment. The next day, Lizzie reportedly tried to buy a solution of hydrosanic acid at Dr. Smith's drugstore. She claimed she needed it to clean a sealskin cloak, but the druggist was unable to legally sell it to her without a doctor's prescription. This incident is particularly notable because hydrogen cyanide isn't typically used as a cleaner, as it doesn't really possess any antiseptic properties. It is known to be extremely poisonous and is often used by exterminators as a pesticide. Later that day, Lizzie's maternal uncle, John Morse, arrived for an extended stay with the Bordens. Lizzie wasn't very fond of her uncle, nor was she pleased about the reason for his visit. Morse had come to discuss the impending transfer of more properties from Andrew's estate. She left to visit a family friend named Alice Russell. She told Alice about recent events around the household that seemed out of the ordinary. She spoke of her father's enemies and her fear of being poisoned, adding that she had recently seen a few suspicious characters lurking around the family home. Alice quoted her as saying, "I'm afraid that someone will do something." The morning of August 4th began with the Bordens, their maid, and their house guest having breakfast together at roughly 7 a.m. Emma had taken a trip out of town and was not present that day. After breakfast, John Morse and Andrew went to relax in the sitting room, while Abby and the maid began the house chores. Morse left at 8:48 a.m. to purchase a pair of oxen and visit his niece, who also lived in Fall River. He was followed a few minutes later by Andrew, who agreed to mail some letters for Lizzie while he was out. Even though Bridget Sullivan was feeling ill that day, she was sent outside by Abby to wash the windows in the oppressive August heat. Abby herself went upstairs at some point between 9 a.m. and 10:30 a.m. to make the bed in the guest room. While she was attending to this task, Abby was set upon by her killer and brutally murdered. The investigators believed the murder weapon was most likely a hatchet. Abby was facing her assailant, then the first blow descended, striking her just above the ear and knocking her to the floor. The murderer proceeded to rain down 17 more blows with the hatchet, demolishing the back of the victim's skull in a homicidal frenzy. When Andrew returned at 10:30 a.m., his key failed to open the door. He knocked for attention, prompting Bridget Sullivan to come hurrying to unlock the door. Strangely, the door appeared to be jammed shut. Bridget struggled to open it and uttered a curse. Bridget would later testify she heard Lizzie laughing immediately after she cursed. The laughter was coming from the top of the stairs. According to Lizzie, she greeted her father and removed his boots, helping him into his slippers before he lay down in the sitting room for a nap. With the chores done and Andrew now comfortably tucked away, Lizzie told Bridget about a department store sale and gave her permission to go. Bridget informed her she was feeling too unwell for an outing and went upstairs to rest in the servants' quarters, which was in the third-floor attic. Sullivan testified she was in her room just before 11:10 a.m. when she heard Lizzie call from the first floor. "Maggie, come quick! Father's dead! Somebody came in and killed him." She ran downstairs and saw Andrew Borden slumped on a sofa in the sitting room, dead from 10 to 11 strikes with a hatchet-like weapon. One of his eyes had been split cleanly in two, suggesting he had been asleep when the attack began. His wounds were still bleeding, which meant he had died only a few minutes before this discovery. Dr. Bowen, the family's physician, arrived from his home across the street and declared Andrew dead. Detectives estimated his death had occurred approximately at 11 a.m. The police were on the scene within a half an hour of Andrew's murder. When asked about the whereabouts of her stepmother, Lizzie said Abby had been out visiting a sick friend. She added that she thought she had heard Abby come home and asked if someone could go upstairs to look for her. Bridget and a neighbor named Adelaide Churchill climbed halfway up the staircase before making a horrible discovery. Abby Borden was lying face down on the floor of the guest room. In all of the confusion that followed Andrew's murder, no one had known that his wife was sprawled in a pool of blood on the second floor. Her body was cold to the touch, meaning she had been killed much earlier in the morning than her husband. The investigators initially failed to properly secure the crime scene, giving access to at least one reporter and even a few members of the public. In a front-page article titled, "Shocking Crime, a venerable citizen and his aged wife hacked to pieces in their home," the Fall River Herald reported that news of the Borden murders spread like wildfire and hundreds poured into 2nd Street, where for years Andrew J. Borden and his wife had lived in happiness. The Herald reporter, who had visited the crime scene, described Andrew Borden's face as sickening to behold. He wrote, "Over the left temple, a wound 6 to 4 inches wide had been made, as if he had been pounded with the dull edge of an axe. The left eye had been dug out, and a cut extended the length of his nose. The face was hacked to pieces, and blood was covering the man's shirt." The police found 2 hatchets, 2 axes, and a hatchet head with a broken handle in the basement. The hatchet head was suspected of being the murder weapon. The break in the handle looked very fresh, and the ash and dust on the head appeared to have been deliberately applied, as if someone tried to make it look like it hadn't been used in a very long time. Because of the mysterious illness that had recently stricken the Borden household, the family's milk was confiscated for testing, and the stomachs of both the deceased were removed during an autopsy that was performed in the dining room. They were all tested for poison, but none was found. The investigators questioned Lizzie Borden and found her strangely aloof for someone whose parents had just been murdered. Her version of the events of that morning were either wildly unlikely or downright contradictory. For example, Lizzie said she'd helped her father take off his boots and put on his slippers when he got back home from running his errands, but the crime scene photos clearly show Andrew was still wearing his boots when he died. When asked about her whereabouts after Andrew had laid down in the sitting room, Lizzie claimed she had gone out to the barn to look for sinkers for an upcoming fishing trip. She claimed she had been up in the loft of the barn for at least 20 minutes, finding Andrew dead upon her return. The investigators noted that it was explosively hot in the barn, making it seem very unlikely that anyone would willingly subject themselves to the searing temperatures up in the loft for more than just a few minutes. In addition, the dust on the floor of the loft appeared to not have been disturbed in quite some time. Despite her suspicious demeanor and evasive answers, no one searched Lizzie for blood, nor did they do more than a cursory search of her bedroom. Lizzie's friend Alice Russell decided to stay with the sisters on the night following the murders, and John Moore spent the night in the attic guest room. On August 5th, Morse attempted to leave and was mobbed by hundreds of people. The police rescued Morse and hustled him back to the Borden home. John Morse was also briefly considered as a suspect, but but he had an ironclad alibi. The focus of the investigation shifted to Lizzie. On August 6th, an editorial in the Fall River paper criticized the police for their inaction in the Borden case. On the same day, the police conducted a thorough search of the house, inspecting the sisters' clothing and confiscating the broken hatchet. That evening, a police officer and the mayor of Fall River came to pay a visit, and Lizzie was informed that she was a suspect in the murders. The next morning, Russell walked in on Lizzie as she was tearing up a dress in the kitchen. Alice demanded to know what she was doing, and Lizzie explained that she intended to burn the dress in a fire because it was covered in paint. There was an inquest into the murders on August 8th. Lizzie requested to have her family attorney present, but was refused under a state statute providing that an inquest must be held in private. Her behavior was erratic throughout the proceedings, and she often refused to answer a question, even if the answer would be beneficial to her. She constantly contradicted herself and provided alternating accounts of the morning in question, such as claiming she was in the kitchen reading a magazine when her father arrived home, then saying she was in the dining room doing some ironing. 2 days later, the inquest adjourned, and Police Chief Hillard arrested Lizzie Borden. The next day, Lizzie entered a plea of not guilty to the charges of murder and was transported by rail car to the jail in Taunton, 8 miles to the north of Fall River. On August 22nd, she returned to a Fall River courtroom for her preliminary hearing, where Judge Josiah Blasdale pronounced her probably guilty and ordered her to face a grand jury for the murder of her parents. Borden's trial started in New Bedford on June 5, 1893. Prosecuting attorneys were Hosea M. Knowlton and future United States Supreme Court Justice William H. Moody. The defense team was made up of Andrew V. Jennings, Melvin O. Adams, and former Massachusetts Governor George D. Robinson. As Moody opened the state case to the jury, he carelessly tossed Lizzie's blue frock on the prosecution table and revealed the skulls of Andrew and Abby Borden. According to a newspaper article, at the sight of the cracked and broken skulls of her deceased parents, Lizzie fell into a faint that lasted for several minutes, sending a thrill of excitement through the awestruck spectators and causing unfeigned embarrassment and discomfiture to penetrate the ranks of counsel. When Lizzie was ready to continue, Moody went on to describe her as the only person having both the motive and opportunity to commit the murders. With a dramatic flair, he pulled out the head of the axe he claimed Lizzie had used to kill her parents, and he showed it to the jury. The significance of the hatchet head was a heated point of contention between the prosecution and the defense. The prosecution argued the killer had removed the handle because it would have been covered in blood, whereas the defense maintained there was no physical evidence to support this statement. There was also no bloody clothing found anywhere in the house, although Alice Russell testified on August 8, 1892, she had witnessed Borden burn a dress in the kitchen stove. The defense never once addressed this claim throughout the duration of the trial. Another hotly debated topic of discussion was the timing of Lizzie Borden's presence within the home that morning. Bridget Sullivan went upstairs to the second floor at 10:58 a.m., leaving Lizzie and her father downstairs. Lizzie told several people she had gone out to the barn at this point and wasn't inside the house for at least 20 minutes or possibly half an hour. However, at least 2 different witnesses testified they saw Lizzie leaving the barn at 11:03 a.m., which indicated that she had only been outside the house for just a few minutes. At 11:10 a.m., Lizzie called Sullivan downstairs and told her Andrew had been murdered and sent her to get a doctor. The most compelling testimony came from Alice Russell. Russell described a visit from Lizzie the night before the murders in which Lizzie announced she would soon be going on vacation. She told Russell, "Something is hanging over me. I cannot tell what it is." Lizzie described her parents' severe stomach illness, which she attributed to bad baker's bread, and went on to say that she was afraid something bad was going to happen. Alice recalled Lizzie saying that she wanted to go to sleep with one eye open half the time for fear somebody might burn the house down or hurt her father because he was so discourteous to people. District Attorney Moody went on to question Russell about the dress burning incident. She recounted that Lizzie had told her, "I'm going to burn this whole thing up. It is covered with paint." On cross-examination, defense attorney George Robinson suggested that a guilty person would be likely to destroy evidence in such an open fashion. Russell, also recounted a conversation with Lizzie about a note that was supposedly received from a messenger on the morning of the murders. According to Lizzie, the note was a request for Abby to come see a sick friend. Despite thorough search of the Borden home, the alleged note was never found. Russell sarcastically suggested that Lizzie's stepmother might have burned the note. Lizzie, according to Russell, replied, "Yes, she must have." The defense exploited the prosecution's own timeline, which allowed from 8 to 13 minutes between Andrew Borden's murder and Lizzie's call to Bridget Sullivan. They pointed out the difficulties of washing blood off one's person, clothes, and a murder weapon, and then hiding the murder weapon, all within such a short span of time. The judge barred the testimony of the druggist who refused to sell Lizzie a solution of hydrosanic acid, stating that the incident was too remote to have relevance to the trial. The defense presented only a handful of witnesses. Charles Gifford and Uriah Kirby reported seeing a strange man near the Borden house around 11 o'clock on the night before the murders. Dr. Benjamin Handfee testified that he saw a pale-faced young man on the sidewalk near 92 2nd Street around 10:30 on August 4th. Two important witnesses for the defense were a plumber and a gas fitter. Both testified they had been in the Borden's barn loft a mere day or two before the murders, casting doubt on the assertion that the dust in the loft had appeared undisturbed. Emma Borden was the defense's most anticipated witness. She testified that Lizzie and her father enjoyed a good relationship. She told jurors that the gold ring found on Andrew's little finger was given to him 10 or 15 years before the murders by Lizzie, claiming it was one of her father's most prized possessions. Emma insisted that relations between Lizzie and her stepmother were also cordial, although she admitted to lingering resentment over the transfer of her grandfather's house to Abby and her sister. Summing up for the defense, A.V. Jennings argued, "There is not one particle of direct evidence in this case from beginning to end against Lizzie A. Borden. There is not a spot of blood. There is not a weapon that they have connected to her in any way, shape, or fashion." Following Jennings, Governor Robinson said in his closing speech that the crime must have been committed by a maniac or a devil, not by someone with the respectable background of his client. He charged the state with failing to meet its burden to proving guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, and that it was physically impossible for Lizzie to have committed the crimes within the timeline suggested by the prosecution. After Hosea Knowlton summed up the prosecution's evidence, Justice Dewey addressed the jury. According to a newspaper report, had the judge been the senior counsel for the defense making the closing plea on behalf of the defendant, he could not have more absolutely pointed out the folly of depending upon circumstantial evidence alone. It was, the newspaper said, both a remarkable charge and a plea for the innocent. Justice Dewey also told the jurors they need to consider Lizzie's exceptional Christian character, which entitled her to every inference in her favor. The jury was sent to deliberate on June 20th, 1893. After an hour and a half of deliberation, the jury acquitted Borden of the murders. As she exited the courthouse, Borden told reporters that she was the happiest woman in the world. After the trial, the Borden sisters moved into a large, modern house in the Hill neighborhood in Fall River. Lizzie began using the name Lizbeth A. Borden. Lizbeth dubbed her new house Maplecroft and hired a staff that included live-in maids, a housekeeper, and a coachman. Because Abby died before her husband, her estate had passed on to Andrew, who had then passed it to his daughters as part of his own estate. Even so, a considerable sum was eventually paid out to settle legal claims by Abby's family. Despite the acquittal, Borden was ostracized by Fall River society. Instead of mingling with Fall River elite, she forged new friendships with actors, spiritualists, and bohemian types of all descriptions. In 1905, Emma and Lizbeth had an argument over a party Lizbeth had thrown for actress Nancy O'Neill, who was rumored to be her lover. After the argument, Emma moved out of the house and never saw her sister again. Borden was gravely ill in her last year following the removal of her gallbladder. She died of pneumonia on June 1st, 1927 in Fall River. Funeral details were not published and very few people attended the service. 9 days later, Emma died from chronic nephritis at the age of 76 in a nursing home in Newmarket, New Hampshire. The sisters were buried side by side in the family plot in the Oak Grove Cemetery. At the time of her death, Borden was worth $250,000. This is equivalent to almost $5 million today. She owned a house on the corner of French Street and Belmont Street, several office buildings, shares in several utilities, 2 cars, and a large amount of jewelry. She left $30,000 to the Fall River Animal Rescue League and $500 in trust for perpetual care of her father's grave. Her closest friend and cousin each received $6,000, and numerous other friends and family members each received between $1,000 and $5,000. Even though the circumstantial evidence weighed heavily in favor of the prosecution, a combination of a lack of physical evidence and a favorable public opinion saved Lizzie from a guilty verdict. However, it is believed Bridget Sullivan may have actually made a deathbed confession to a childhood friend mere weeks before she died at the county hospital in Butte, Montana, in March of 1948. Bridget told her friend Minnie Green that she had worked for the Bordens at the time of the murders, a crime Minnie had never heard of before Bridget's unexpected confession. Bridget told her she was fond of Lizzie and had often took her side during arguments in the Borden household. She admitted that she had helped Lizzie out at the trial and had been less than candid with the prosecution during her testimony. Whether this last tidbit is fact or folklore, the murders of Andrew and Abby Borden are still considered to be unsolved. It's a fascinating case that has been shrouded in rumor and speculation for well over a century, even aspiring a nursery rhyme that endures to this very day. In fact, there's actually a little-known secret verse to this rhyme, and it goes something like this. Andrew Borden is now dead. Lizzie hit him on the head. Up in heaven he will sing. On the gallows she will swing.